Welcome to BuildIt's Intro to Blender series. There's many great detailed tutorials out there for Blender, but this series is meant to show a beginner the kinds of things you can do in Blender. We'll be using Blender 2.79 in this tutorial because there's still some buggy things in the new version 2.8, but the skills are very transferable. Let's get started with the beginning file. The first thing we'll do is get accustomed to the windows in Blender and what they look like. When you first open Blender 2.79, this is the default layout. You can see that the main window is the 3D view window. Up on top is our info window that contains our file tab and other stuff. With all the windows, you can resize them how you want. We have the outliner and properties window on the right hand side, the timeline down below. If you want a new window, simply look for the three diagonal lines on the top right corner of a window and drag it out. From there, you can choose which window you need. To close it up again, simply click the diagonal line corner of the old window it came from and drag it towards the new window until an arrow appears. In the beginning file, you have three things in your scene: a cube mesh, a camera, and a light source. These are the three basic things you'll need to render a picture out of Blender. Let's talk about basic navigation. Left click in Blender actually moves the cursor around, and right click is the one to select. Tap A to select all or deselect all. Middle scroll zooms in and out. Middle press drag rotates. And shift middle press drag is to pan. Having a mouse is very important for Blender. Now let's start playing with the mesh. The three most basic transforms are scale, move, and rotate. The hotkeys is S for scale. You can tap S in either X, Y, or Z in order to only control one axis. To control two axes at a time, you can tap S, X, Y, or Z, hold Shift, and select another axis in order to do so. G is for grab, and same goes for the axes. You can see that doesn't go up the Z axis there. And R is for rotate. For our first exercise, we'll create a pedestal. We will delete our cube by selecting it and tapping X to delete. Then I move my cursor to the center using Shift S so that my cylinder will appear in the center. Then I'll click Shift A to create a new mesh. On the left hand side, immediately after you create the cylinder, you can change the number of vertices, and I'll do 16. Now let's go into edit mode. In edit mode, we can play with the vertices, edges, and faces of an object. You can see that down here when I select vertices, it only affects that one vertice, edges, and faces. They do very different things. Now we need to add more geometry in order to play with the shape of the model. Use Ctrl R and hover over an edge with your mouse to create edge loops. You can move it around and left click to change the position or right click to stick with the centered position. You can also middle scroll to increase and decrease the amount of loops. While I still have those loops selected, I'm going to scale Y to move them closer to the edges and add some more edge loops in order to be able to affect my column a little bit more. Now I want to add blocks to the ends of my column so it looks like a pedestal. In edit mode and face mode, I'm going to select the top face of my column and use Shift S to move my cursor there. Now I can Shift A and create a cube where that cursor was. I'm going to scale so it looks more like a pedestal. Extrude is another way to add geometries that builds on what's already there. I'm going to use E and scale X and Y axes to make it into a smaller square within the block. I clicked Z to go into wireframe mode so I can make the smaller square as close to the size of the cylinder as I can. I also changed my view to orthographic view by hitting numpad 5. If you don't have a number pad, you can go into user preferences and select emulate numpad to use the regular numbers on your keyboard. So the reason why I made it into 16 vertices earlier for my cylinder is so that I know how many vertices I need to make in my square in order for it to line up to the cylinder. So because I want 4 vertices on each side, I just need to make 3 cuts. Now I'll make a hole in the box that will match to the cylinder. To make this easier for me, I selected the cylinder by selecting a side and clicking L for linked, which will select all linked geometry, and H for hide. I use C to make a selection brush and middle scroll to change the size of the brush. Make sure you're on face mode. I use left mouse click and drag to select faces and middle click to deselect faces, then click X to delete the selected faces. Before I connect the box and the cylinder, I want to make the hole in the box more round. I'll select each vertex by using right mouse click and holding shift. Going to wireframe mode and orthographic view may help. I'm just going to fiddle with this until it looks perfect. If you take your time, you'll be rewarded with the fact that you don't have to do this again. We will duplicate the box you already made and rotate it to be on the bottom. So again, use L and right mouse click to select the linked geometries of the box. Then use Shift S to move your cursor to the center. On the bottom, use the cursor as the pivot point. Up until now, the center of the active object was the pivot point, but since we want it to rotate to the bottom of the box, we will need it to be in the center of the cylinder. Use Shift D to duplicate, then click R, X, and type in 180 to turn the box around the pivot point 180 degrees around the X-axis. I'm just going to briefly hide the tops and bottoms of the boxes so that I can get to the faces of the cylinder so I can delete them. We will need them gone to bridge the tops and bottoms and the cylinders together. Use Alt-H to unhide. Bridging can join different shapes together. I'm going to go into Edge mode and use Alt right mouse click to select the edge of the topping, hold Shift and Alt right mouse click on the edge of the cylinder and go to the menu on the bottom bar, Edges and Bridge Edge Loops. Now you can see they're connected when you use L for linked. Repeat on the bottom. Now I want to edit until I'm happy. You can see here I forgot to edit the pivot point back and it was going lopsided, so make sure you change that. Sculpt mode is another useful tool in Blender, but more for organic shapes. We'll hide that pedestal we just made and make a cube in the center of our screen. In edit mode, I'm going to just add a bunch of cuts on every side so that I have a bunch of vertices to work with. I'm also going to make a cube with no extra vertices so that we can compare what it looks like when you try to sculpt without vertices. To get to sculpt mode, go to the bottom where it says object mode and select sculpt mode instead. Very quickly, I'm going to show what it looks like to sculpt with vertices and what it looks like to sculpt without vertices. There's really nothing for the brush to affect. There's a bunch of built-in brushes for you to play with in Blender. In each brush, you can change the radius of the brush, the strength, and the smoothness. For certain brushes like inflate, deflate, or draw, there is an additive or subtractive version of the brush. Dyn Topo is a really cool setting. On my low vertice cube, you can see if I check Dyn Topo, I can add more vertices automatically. Symmetry and lock allow you to be a little bit more precise with your sculpting. So you can see here, if I use symmetry on all the axes, it copies what I do over the different axes. And if I hit lock, it locks the axis that I chose. So it's a little bit more obvious with the grab brush. Brushes to make an abstract sculpture for your pedestal. I'm also going to use a little cheat to make my sculpt more smooth by going to Modifiers, which is the little hammer in the Properties bar, and selecting Subdivide. There's many useful modifiers you can look into in Blender to help you out. Then I'm going to make my pedestal visible again and move my sculpture on top. Voila! Next week we will learn how to add colors and materials to these shapes. Thanks for watching.